Okay, today we're going to convert a Lima TGV set from 2-rail DC to 3-rail AC digital. These sets were made back about 15 years ago until the Lima company went bankrupt, and then their assets were bought by Hornby. Since then, Hornby's released the sets as well, but they released them in digital. And this one is, as I mentioned, 2-rail DC. It's analog. You can see we have the 4-unit main set. This is the unpowered unit, which I've already worked on. I'll explain that as we go along. 2 cars, and then the powered unit. And we're going to work on the power unit today. So the first thing we're going to do in order to be able to work on this is we've got to get the shell off. So with this generation of TGV model, it's actually only held on by a retaining clip on the back. So you take a small flat-handed screwdriver and just kind of slowly work it out, and then come along the sides, and we should be able to gently remove the shell without damaging anything. Alright, so we have the shell off, and I'm going to set that aside for now. And you can see that they have a small circuit board and some wiring. We're going to remove the circuit board because we won't need it. We'll redo all the wiring as we convert it to digital. So the first thing I'm going to do is take out the screws that hold the circuit board. I'm going to just cut all the wires that go to the circuit board as close to the circuit board as possible, although some of the wires we'll just replace entirely, but for now we'll preserve the length as much as possible. And so the circuit board is off, and you can see for wires we have these 2 black wires that go to the 2 sides of the truck, to the wheels. Same thing here in the front. Since we're going to convert this to 3-rail, we're actually going to connect these together, because in a 3-rail system the center track is your power and your 2 rails are ground. And then these wires here go to the lights in the front. We'll actually end up removing those. And these 2 wires go to the motor, obviously. And we'll end up removing those when we do the rewiring as well. All right, to help with the wiring, we're going to use a wiring harness from ESU. It's a 8-pin plug with the appropriate wires on it. And I always like using a socket with decoders. That way, if you ever need to replace the decoder, if you want to replace it with a different kind of decoder or a sound decoder, you don't have to completely rewire. You can just unplug. And for this particular model, since there's not going to be a lot of functions, the older style 8-pin connector is perfect. For the decoder, I'm actually going to use an ESU lock pilot. Although it's in a box, it's actually one that I took out of another locomotive, so we're reusing it because I upgraded that locomotive to sound. Again, good reason to always use a socket. We're going to use a couple of inductors for the motor. These are standard Markland parts to help with noise suppression with the motor. And then what I found is standard Markland 7164 pickup shoe can be used to have the 3rd-rail pickup on these. Lima actually did produce a few of these in 3-rail, and they have provisions to mount the pickup shoe right here. So we're going to preserve the wiring to the trucks, but the wiring for the motor, we're going to go ahead and take that off because we want to put the inductors on here. So just heat that up slightly, and then just gently pull on the wire, and that will come off. And again, just be patient. There it goes. All right, the other thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the wires going to the lights, and we're going to use the wires from the wiring harness to redo that. So I'm going to go ahead and hit that with a little bit of heat from the soldering iron, pull those off. Not really important to remember which one's which because there's colored bulbs, red for reverse, white for forward. So easy to remember when we go to add the wiring harness. Alright, so speaking of the wiring harness, this is it. We need to figure out exactly where we want to position things. So I'm going to position it here. The decoder will plug in, and then we'll mount the decoder back here. So we'll go ahead and figure out approximate length of wire that we need for the lights. For the lights, we're going to need the blue, the white, and the yellow wires. So, and we'll go ahead and cut those off. The one thing that Lima didn't do when they produced these is they did not install the high third light. So if you look, most European locomotives have a high third light, and there's provisions for it here on the TGV. So what we're going to do is we're going to make provisions to add a light. So I've got a bit of extra white wire here. I'm just going to cut an extra length of white wire. We're going to need a bit of extra blue wire because blue is actually the hot lead for the lights. And in order to get the third light to light up, we'll need to bring both leads, white and blue, to that third light. So I'm just going to cut that to be about the same length. All right, so I've stripped the wires a little bit, and I'm going to twist them. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of solder on them. Now we've got the white and the blue wires that are going to go to that third headlight. I'm going to twist those together before I put the solder on. Okay, I'll do the same thing for the blue. The yellow wire, which will go to the red bulb. Okay. The way these were soldered, we've got this black wire, which we're going to take off, which is the common for the two light bulbs. So the blue will go on that side, and then the white and the yellow will go on the other sides. So I'm just going to get this a little heated, pull that off. We'll go ahead and do the white wire now because it's the hardest one to get in there. So we'll get it in there where the lead is. And not only does putting a little solder help hold the wires together, it makes it a little bit easier when you heat this up. The same for the yellow. All right, and now I'm going to put the blue wire on. Hit that with a little bit of heat. Okay. So those are the wires for the lights. And I've got the extra blue and white wires, which will go to the third headlight when we put that on. Okay, so we've got some other wires here. We've got green, which would be for a function. We won't have any functions on here, so I'm just going to go ahead and trim this off. The green wire is for function, which we're not going to use, so I trimmed that one off. The orange and the gray wires are the two motor leads, and the black and the red are for the power. So the red will go to the pickup shoe when we add that, and the black will be the one that will be connected to the 4 connections on the trucks. It's time to start working, I think, on the leads. So this is the Markland pickup shoe. I'm going to open up the tabs on this and remove this little backing plate that you would normally use. We're not going to use it. So I'm just straightening these out a little bit because I found that these will fit up perfectly right in the truck for the front of the locomotive. So what I need to do now is I need to put a little bit of solder on that so that I can connect the wire. A little bit of solder flux on it. Any amount. We're going to feed the red wire down into the front truck and out the bottom. And while we're at it, we can see we've got the 2 black leads. So for the black wire, we'll go there, and then we'll cut it off, and we'll actually use the other piece of it to go to the leads in the back. Okay, so it's a little trickier now. I've stripped the red wire, and I'm going to put a little bit of solder on it. Get it into the pickup shoe and solder it where I added that solder. Okay. So before I push it on up in there, I'm actually going to use just a little bit of clear silicone, a little silicone adhesive, and I'm just going to take this plastic rod here, dip a little bit on the truck. That will hold the pickup shoe in place if it ever did want to come loose. Yet, if you ever need to replace it, it's silicone adhesive, so you can just pry it off. And there's actually room for the 4 tabs to go up into the truck, and you can just push them in slowly, gently, with a screwdriver. Okay, so we finally got the pickup shoe in there again. They're easily bent, so you need to be gentle, but we finally convinced it to go in there with a little bit of filing and gently pushing it in. So we've hooked up the red wire to the pickup shoe. That will be our power lead, and our ground leads will be the 4 wires that go to the wheels. So we're going to strip those back, and we're going to connect them to the black wire on the decoder socket. I'm going to take the black piece of the wire that we cut off, and I'm going to twist that together with the one that's still attached to the decoder socket. Now I'm going to do the same thing for these wires, but I'm going to make sure that they're not tangled up with anything else. This is to the right and left wheels on the front truck. Alright, and the same thing for the wires on the rear trucks. Alright, so I've put solder on those, which will hold those together as we connect them. But before we go forward, I'm going to get a little piece of shrink wrap, because as we make this connection, we want to be able to cover it. So I'm actually going to take a little piece of that, put it over the wire coming from the decoder socket, and push it back out of the way. You want to keep it back out of the way because the heat from your soldering iron can actually cause it to shrink, and then you can't move it. Got the 2 wires from the decoder socket, the 2 wires from the front truck. They've already got solder on them, so I'm just going to hit them with a little heat, a little bit more solder, and they will be connected. We'll manipulate the solder joint into place, and we'll take our little piece of heat shrink and we'll push it over the joint, and we'll hit that with a little bit of heat later once we've tested the connection. Alright, so now we have the black wire that we had cut off originally. I'm going to cut it to the length it needs to be now. Alright, I'm going to strip it, and I'll put a little bit of heat shrink tubing on that. I'll strip this off and then solder it to the rear 2 wires. Okay, and we'll connect that to the 2 in the rear. Alright, so we've got almost all the connections made now. We still have the motor leads to do. We'll work on those next, but you can see we have up in the front, we have the white and yellow wires going to the red and white bulbs. Yellow is reversed, so that's the red bulb, white to the white bulb. The common wire, blue, on the side. We have the extra bits that we put on there because we're going to add a 3rd headlight. We've got the connection to the pickup shoe in the red, and then we've connected all the black together, and I'm just going to push this bit of heat shrink tubing over that connection. And so now we have all of our power pickups. As I mentioned before, the green wire is for a function which we're not going to use. So that leaves us now with the gray and the orange wires, which are going to be your motor lead connections. But before we connect those to the motor, we're actually going to add these inductors. Again, these inductors help suppress any noise from the motor. I'm just going to trim these off a little bit because they'll get connected directly to the motor on one side. And then I'll leave them a little bit longer for now. They'll be connected to the orange and the gray wires. So I'm going to get that ready, and we'll solder on those in a minute. Okay, I put a little bit of solder on the end of the inductors, and what I'm going to do now is connect those directly to the motor leads, which are right here. So those are on there now, and we're going to want to connect the orange and the gray motor leads to those. And we've got a 50-50 chance of getting these right. I've done a few of these, but I don't actually feel like opening up the shell on another one and seeing which one was which. So what we're going to do is we're going to put them on there and we'll test it. And if it's not right, we'll just reverse them. So I'm going to take a little piece of heat shrink tubing. I've already trimmed these, so what I'm going to do is strip them and I'll solder them to the inductor connections and then put the shrink rack over them, but I won't heat it and shrink it until we actually test the locomotive and see if it works. Did the motor leads, like I said, 50-50 chance that we got them right. I put the heat shrink on there temporarily, haven't shrunk it. We'll test it and see if we got them right. If not, we'll come back to the bench and we'll just reverse them, because we want, when the locomotive goes forward, we want the white light to come on, and when it goes backwards, we want the red light to come on. So although it's possible to go into the decoder and program it, much better to just, while you got it on the workbench, reverse the wires and not have to go through that. So just kind of as a recap, we've connected both the left and right hand connections from each of the trucks to the black wire. We've run the red wire to the pickup shoe that we added. We've run the white and yellow light to the lights, wires to the lights, and the blue common also to the lights. We've left the extra blue and white wires for that third headlight, which we'll get to. And what we're going to do now is we're actually going to plug the decoder into the socket, and we're going to go over to the other part of the workbench, and we're going to put this on the tester, and we'll see if we got this right or not. Okay, so we've taken the power unit of the TGV over. We put it on my test track, which is connected to my lock programmer, which is connected to a laptop. We'll cover this at a later date, but what this allows us to do is test and see if we've got all the connections correct. So I'm going to go ahead and give it some power, and as you can see, we have the white light on, which means, yeah, very good. As we give the motor a little bit of power, it went in the right direction. Now we'll hit reverse, we got the red light on, a little bit of power, and there you go. So all of our connections are good. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to use just a regular old hair dryer to heat up that heat shrink and shrink it onto those wires, and then I'm going to neaten up the wiring and add the third headlight. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to add the third headlight, which will go at that top light in the locomotive. And what I'm actually going to do is, even though those are bulbs, I'm going to use an LED to make the high headlight. This is a LED I bought from a company called Miniaturtronics, and it has kind of a golden glow to it that makes it look very much like a conventional light bulb. So you can see on an LED, there's two leads. You got the longer lead, which is your positive lead, and the shorter lead, which is negative. And not to confuse you, but I'm actually going to trim the longer lead off and make it shorter, because I'm going to connect the resistor to the longer lead, and I don't want the leads to be too ridiculously long when they go into the locomotive. So this is going to take me a couple minutes. I'm just going to solder the resistor to the LED, and then I'll solder the blue and the white wires to the LED. I think I mentioned before, even though blue is the common wire, it's the hot wire. It's the positive connection. So that's going to end up going to the same side that I'm putting the resistor on. And then the white wire will go to the negative side. And if we do this correctly, when the white light is on and the locomotive is moving forward, this LED will light up. So be back in a minute after I do this soldering. Okay, so what I've done is I've taken that LED, took the positive lead, cut it shorter, added the resistor. I soldered the blue wire to the positive lead, the white wire, which is for the front headlight, to the negative lead. Got a little piece of heat shrink tubing that I'm going to slide over this. and then I'm going to shrink that on there. And then what I'm going to do is, I took a bigger piece of shrink wrap tubing, and glued that to the top of the locomotive. That will provide the housing for that LED. And what I'll do before I'm done is I'll take a piece of black electrical tape and tape it over the front part of that so there's no light leakage into the cab. Okay, so what we did was we neatened up all the wiring with those wiring ties like I showed you. I think I put 3 of them on all together. We carefully positioned all the wiring inside the chassis and gently put the shell back on. We've connected it to the 4-unit set. There's plenty of add-on cars for these, which I have, but for testing purposes today, we just have the 4-unit set. The non-powered unit on the end I had previously done earlier today. Essentially the same process. The only difference is I used a function decoder because I don't need any motor control. And I intentionally wired the lights backwards so that I don't have to change any of the parameters in the decoder. When the powered locomotive is going forward, the rear will have red lights and vice versa. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go over and test run this thing back and forth on the track and make sure that the motor works and that the lights work, and we'll see how it goes. And there it goes. And they may be a little bit hard to see, but the red lights will be on in the non-powered locomotive. I'm going to slow it and reverse direction, and now there should be lights on in the non-powered locomotive, and it should go in the opposite direction. And I can see as it goes by me that the red lights are indeed on in the locomotive. So it looks like everything is working correctly. And so there you have it, a Lima analog 2-rail DC set converted to Markland 3-rail digital. Thank you.